So the other day, the TV was on, and there was a show on Animal Planet. I believe it's called Fatal Attractions, something like that. And it's about people who are either killed or severely injured by the pets that they keep. Usually, like a poisonous snake or lizards or maybe pit bulls or something. And it's not a show that I watch regularly or anything. But anyway, the episode that I saw was about an Australian man who owned an animal that they kept referring to as a gimp, which is apparently it was a crocodile. It was a smaller crocodile, but it was still maybe 10 feet long. And I don't know if it's some kind of pygmy crocodile or if that's just a nickname they were giving it. But at one point, the gimp attacked him. It bit him in the arm, and it didn't kill him, but it did an awful lot of damage, and he had to go to the hospital and whatnot. And that, in and of itself, is not very interesting. But then, after they explained his surgeries and that he was better, they interviewed him because he had survived, and he said that he was really upset about the incident because he could tell that Sheila, or whatever the name he gave to his gimp, I forget what it is now. Let's just call her Sheila. This gimp, he goes, she felt really bad and guilty about what she did. So he felt bad because he believed that his rapacious reptilian pet felt guilty. Now, as soon as I heard that, I knew for certain that he had a psychological problem because uh, a reptile is not capable of feeling that. Now, there might be some debate for some other animals. Perhaps dogs can feel that way. I bet some of the higher primates, who knows, maybe killer whales or dolphins can, I don't know. But a reptile, certainly not a crocodile, cannot feel guilty. And I was thinking this, and, and this guy obviously is delusional. This thing is a dangerous animal, and he has just imagined basically that it really is friendly and cares for him and doesn't try. I mean, they show him handling it, and it's trying to bite him and stuff, and he is familiar enough with its mannerisms that he can avoid that usually, but that doesn't mean it's not really trying to get him. And then the show actually showed a psychologist, and she gave the term for the condition. I forget what it is, but it's where she says people will selectively pick, you know, a piece of data here, a piece of data there, and they'll use that to construct their reality, and they'll omit everything that could possibly contradict their conclusion. Uh, and so it's not so much that they lie, it's that they ignore every counterfactual piece of information. And if you have, this guy probably has interactions with this crocodile for, every day for years, and because it's a crocodile, will live for a long time. He's had it for a long time. It's easy to pick a few little incidents here and there and come to a conclusion that it really likes you or it's concerned about you or it's guilty or it has feelings or emotions to you when it would kill you if it could. And although that's interesting, I bring it up because I think this is the way people feel about the state. The state is obviously millions of times more deadly than any crocodile or any other animal for that matter, save perhaps the disease-bearing mosquito. Uh, or maybe we could isolate some other pathogens that might be able to lay claim to this, but uh, no apex predator or anything like that is anywhere near as blood-soaked or rapacious or evil as the state. And the evidence of this is overwhelming. In fact, we all study it. Everybody is aware of the depredations of the state. But so many people on all across the political spectrum have advocate or support a version of the state that omits uh, a certain degree, usually the majority of that evidence. And so instead of looking at the wars and the taxation and the imprisonment and the corruption and all that, they look at roads. They don't look at the taxes that pay for the roads, and they look at the welfare recipient and not the ones who are um, disempowered and made dependent, but maybe that one or two who are really out go-getters and who are able to use the subsidy to help themselves. I mean, how many times when you talk about welfare do you hear about, when I was a kid, my single mom had 11 children and she got a welfare check and we all went to college? That's anecdotal. It's not systematic evidence of anything, and it ignores the billions of dollars that are spent on people who just end up being drug addicts or end up being homeless. It totally ignores the people who are taxed to pay for it. It totally ignores the incentives involved. It just picks this one thing, this one little aspect, as Bastiat would say, the seen as opposed to the unseen. Although it's not unseen, the things the state does are plain to see. They're actually not in dispute. I've never, in any debate, when I say, well, the state kills all these people in wars, I've never heard anyone say, no, you're wrong. They never kill anyone in war. Everyone knows that they do. But they construct this theoretical state that has no real relevance in reality. It's a benevolent angelic state that theoretically can't work. I mean, if we want to get into the incentives and all that, it's impossible. But leaving that aside, just empirically at history, that is an outlandish kind of Candyland to imagine. And whatever problems we might imagine in a free society, and certainly there are many, when people propose, well, the state can just do that, they're talking about a state that is not rapacious, that is not bloodthirsty, that is not incentivized to pillage and plunder to its heart's content. And that's just not realistic. Um, my phone could ring right now and it could be the oil company and they could say, you know what, you're a really smart guy and we've decided that you're going to run our operation, and part of your newfound authority in that position is you have the ability to tax everybody out there. You can take as much money as you want, and you also have the power to legislate. You can pass a law, and everyone's bound to obey it. Now, obviously, the moral hazard there couldn't possibly be a situation with more moral hazard. The incentive to abuse that power, assuming that the authority figures above me couldn't renege it at any point. That's maybe why it's not a great analogy. But or at the very least, the chances of that happening were remote, would be almost completely irresistible. But let's assume that I'm such a benevolent, altruistic fellow that I'm able to not succumb, and I decide I'm going to try and use my ability to tax and to legislate for good. I'm honestly going to do this. Now, I don't know of any government that has actually gotten to that point. I know of a few politicians, and I don't just mean Ron Paul, a few over the years. Yeah, I can even think of some monarchs who this applied to, who appear to have wanted to be this way. But the fact that I have been granted the power to tax and the power to legislate does not grant me the omniscience that it would be necessary for me to run everybody's lives. And here's the final problem that negates even the idea of an angelic, well-meaning state. Uh, just like the crocodile, as much as you may wish, it can't have emotions. It doesn't. I cannot have the knowledge to run society. And even if I wish to make everything better, the power I would use to do good, as Gandalf would say, would ultimately be used to shape society to reflect my own biases on what I thought would be best, which ultimately cannot be for the common good in any meaningful sense. And the power granted to me will end up simply distorting society and causing great waste and subsequently great suffering, even if I'm not intentionally imprisoning or torturing people, which is historically pretty common. The fact that maybe I decide that this or that industry deserves more subsidy than another, and I honestly believe that, it will not be true. Even if those were important industries, I will not know how much to allocate to them, and so they will either be over or under allocated, and there will be subsequent wastage of resources and labor and everything else. And so, and this is an obvious fact. There's no, I mean, the only scenario where this wouldn't apply is if you have an omniscient government, and that just doesn't exist. I mean, nobody has claimed that they can produce that. Nobody has. I mean, I've never heard anyone say, even the Venus Project, La La Landers won't say, well, we have an omniscient government, but then they'll make an argument that would only work with one. And this really bugs me. How can you say I want this? I'm advocating a system that would only work if you had an omniscient government and a benevolent one on top. Uh, and they don't couch it in that terms because they just imagine the government as being nice and good because they omit all the evidence to the contrary, which is overwhelming. And so it's a psychological problem that they have, and I think it's one that's inculcated into them by the government. The government spends a lot of money on education for that purpose. And just read the other day, like Noam Chomsky says, the point of the media isn't to foster debate; it's to sell the message of the power elite or the government to the people. It's to convince the people that the government is justified in whatever policies it is imposing on us, whatever they are. And this has affected people. They have simply accepted something as being necessary and good when the evidence doesn't really suggest that. And to account for that, they have to basically ignore reality to a large extent. When you do this, you're only omitting parts of reality, not everything. You're just omitting everything that's necessary, or anything that could contradict your fantasy. And they need to construct a fantasy because they're just told that we need to have a government, and government's benevolent, and government makes society better, and rather than really question that, which most people never do, they make up a government in their mind, a benevolent, omniscient government that's never existed, that can't exist, and they and it would be one thing if people said, I favor an omniscient, benevolent government, and I do. If you could give me an omniscient, benevolent government, I would support it. But the thing is then they advocate the actual government that we have, which is neither benevolent or omniscient. So it's like it's kind of like the religious people who might say something to the effect that, well, government's justified because we want a kingdom of Christ, and so I support the U.S. government because I support a kingdom of Christ. Now, assuming the kingdom of Christ is some kind of biblically, theologically rigorous state, well, the Republican Congress under Bush or Obama doesn't fit that criteria. So by supporting the U.S. government, you're not supporting a kingdom of Christ or a benevolent, omniscient state. You're imagining one, and then you're just conflating the two, and you're supporting something that's totally different. I mean, I've encountered this also with the wars. I remember getting in a long debate with just a rabid Islamophobe who he just hated Muslims, and just the whole Muslim world is a giant conspiracy to kill all Christians and whatnot. And he's very much supported the wars for this reason. And I just started saying, well, wait a second, in our war in Iraq, we support democracy in Iraq, which means that the Shiite majority, who are far more Muslim and Islamist than the Ba'athist secular Saddam Hussein government was, we support them. And the rulers of Iraq now, who we support, who our military defends, are Muqtada al-Sadr and the Ayatollah Sistani, who are, the Ayatollah Sistani is not a secular leader. He's Ayatollah. And they're Shiites. They're extremely Muslim. And if you go to Afghanistan, we have Hamid Karzai, who is a Pashtun Muslim, and We give our military to a Muslim government. They have Muslim law in Afghanistan. It's true we're fighting Muslims, but we're also fighting for Muslims. And so I said, you hate all these Muslims, but we are giving Muslims in both of the wars, or all of them now. And in all the wars we fight in, we're always taking the side of either the government or the insurgents, either of which is going to be Muslim. So we're supporting Muslims. And so you have this, you hate Muslims, you hate Muslims, you hate Muslims, but you support the wars. But the wars aren't anti-Muslim. They're anti this particular Muslim faction in favor of this Muslim faction, and it's not necessarily the more radical. In Iraq, we're definitely supporting the more radical Islamic. In Libya, that's also what's happened, and he admitted that, oh well, I don't support supporting the Muslim, the Shiites in Iraq, or the Pashtuns in Afghanistan, or Al Qaeda in Libya, as it turns out, or at least that's the report. I don't really know if that's really true, but he still supports the war. So he's imagining a war against Islam. It's explicitly against Islam, a battle of civilization. And of course, that was stupid too. But let's just accept that for now. And then when you point out that the wars aren't like that at all, he still supports the wars anyway, because he imagines that, well, it's really against Islam, and the fact that it's not, that it clearly is just geopolitical gamesmanship written in blood and slaughter that isn't explicitly anti-Muslim. He just can't accept. If he was going to be consistent in his Islamophobia, then the wars should be totally different in scope. We should either not be involved at all, or we should literally vaporize all Muslims, which I hate to say, he probably was close to that position, and even if he wouldn't have advocated, I bet I can find somebody who would. In fact, people in Congress have said that. Tom Tancredo said we should nuke Mecca. What an outrage. I actually met Tom Tancredo. He didn't seem that crazy, but words like that. So I think I'm not an objectivist, but there's much to be said that we have an objective reality, and we need to try and deal with that as much as possible. Our senses are fallible. We always have to realize that we can be mistaken, and our perspective can skew what we, how we perceive the world. But for people to just imagine a theoretical myth state and then support the actual state, which does not conform to the one that they're imagining at all and never can, is extremely dangerous, and it's a huge problem, and it's very, very annoying.